I know I had to read this one and thinking.
Hello. Right. Okay. So we're live now. This is the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons Glasgow Faculty of Podiatric Medicine Journal Club. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm joined this evening by Dr. Scott Telfer and Professor James Woodburn of Glasgow Caledonian University at the Institute of Applied Health Research. We'll be discussing the paper, let me Google that for you, a time series analysis of seasonality in internet search trends for terms related to foot and ankle pain. This was published in the Open Access Journal of Foot and Ankle Research this year in Volume 8. So I'll start off, I think we'll just go through the abstract so that everyone who's watching is up to speed. So this is the background to this paper was an analysis of internet search traffic, which may present the opportunity to gain insights into general trends and patterns in information-seeking behavior related to medical conditions at a population level. For prevalent and widespread problems such as foot and ankle pain, this information has the potential to improve our understanding of seasonality and trends within these conditions and their treatments, and may act as a useful understanding of seasonality. May act as a useful proxy for the true incidence, prevalence, and characteristics. This study aimed to explore seasonal effects, general trends, and relative popularity of internet search terms related to foot and ankle pain over the past decade. And I'll stop there because we're going to move over to our guest for this evening. But I would just say, for those who are listening, because we have many students who enjoy the Journal Club here at the Royal College, this was a particularly tricky paper for many of our members and students. Time series analysis is not something that we would perhaps commonly look at the Journal Club, so it proves to be a little bit difficult for those used to looking at critical reviews and so forth. So with that introduction, can I pass over to Dr. Scott and Jim at Glasgow Caledonian University and ask for their quick thoughts on the overview of the paper here. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and hello to everyone. Welcome from Glasgow here in Scotland. Beautiful day. So we're happy to share our insights on this paper. I think we would agree too that it's been an interesting and a challenging area to look at. It is a new way of looking at data in a different way. So as we were discussing with our host tonight, if you know our body of work, it is slightly different. And what this paper has allowed us to do is really have a different approach to data analysis, and also to build some experience about looking at trend data using obviously one of the most common search engines available, and then really to develop a methodology to analyze that. And so we thought very broadly about the about where to apply it. And again, if you know our work, you might have expected that we were looking at things like rheumatoid arthritis and such like. But we decided just to be a little bit more broader than that. And my colleague Scott here can explain the reasons for that as we move on. And then also to think about, if you're looking at trend data, a scenario or a situation where you could actually see differences in the trends. And so we thought seasonality might be an area that would be worth testing. And again, so an a priori hypothesis saying that, well, we know from practice that referrals and patterns for foot pain is never always the same. And as Scott alludes to in the background, we know from clinical experience, again, in our own area of arthritis, that the winter period, particularly here in Scotland, tends to be that there is an exacerbation of symptoms in comparison, say, to the summer months. And it's never really been explained why there might be seasonal patterns, or in fact what the nature of those seasonal patterns could be. And then, of course, Google gives you a global search engine. So if you think about the natural extension of that question, you could then say, well, let's look at a time of the year when seasonality is diametrically opposite. So Scotland, so northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. So again, it's using my the super brain of my colleague here to just think of a scenario where the trends might differ according to seasons, and then using a comparator, i.e. comparing northern, southern hemisphere time series data to give us some initial insights. And I think we're very clear that these are initial insights. And as we probe into this a little bit deeper, we'll be able to hopefully be challenged on what we think are the weaknesses and how this could be improved. And I think we've got some ideas around that. So against the hypothesis set, we were able to detect seasonal trends. We were able to look to see how those trends varied over a 10-year period. And then using the hemisphere seasonality model, we could detect differences, which I guess has supported our hypothesis. And then I think we got some initial and some interesting insights about the types of common treatments that people may search under. And we say people because, of course, we don't know the nature of who's making these making these searches. So very much proof of principle, proof of concept, first insights, develop the methodology, try something in a broad sense, and let's see what initial insights that we provide. Interestingly enough, just as an aside, there has been a lot of interest in this paper with regards to health planning and such like, and using that type of data. And as Scott alludes to in the background, you know, there has been some good examples. So about tracking influenza and such like has been useful. So for chronic long-term conditions where you've got obviously you would expect that people were searching those constantly and consistently. Clearly, access and global access we would expect those trends to rise. So that gives you a sort of broad overview, and I think we're quite happy to accept questions now and comments that dig into the paper a wee bit more critically. Scott, yeah.
I think also on the background, I think how we came to write this paper, we're thinking now these days when people are looking for information about health and problems, whether they are musculoskeletal or other, that it's definitely the case now that, particularly for the young generation, the internet is the first place you go if you have a symptom, if you have any sort of question related to health. The first thing you look up is typing into Google. You don't go to your doctor anymore. You type into Google, and then perhaps on the basis of that you decide whether or not you need to go to your doctor, podiatrist, whoever, physio. So I think it's just going to become more and more important as an area, and for us as researchers, it's important to be at the start of that curve and being able to understand how we can use this data, how we can track it, how it can inform the way that should provide care. But yeah, so it is very much a proof of concept in terms of that, but it's definitely an area that I think we'll see a lot more activity in the coming years.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights. Is the sound okay at your end?
Very good. Yeah, we're okay.
So we have had a number of questions from our members and fellows, and if you don't mind, we'll just pick our way through them. Were you surprised by the results of the study, in particular the seasonal variation, the fact that there was more searches in summer than winter?
I mean, I kind of went in with an open mind, so not necessarily a surprise, but it was interesting to see just how much variation there was. I think for foot pain, the numbers offhand was that 30 or 40% increase in the summer, which was, it was surprising that there was that much variation. Perhaps hypothesised that there would be a bit of an increase over between the summer months and winter. And that was fairly significant.
And I noticed that the summer months are listed here as June to September, the winter being November to February, but we're having a rather balmy October outside just now.
I wondered if that explained actually the variation between northern and southern hemisphere. So in the northern hemisphere, the increase in the summer was 35%, and in the southern hemisphere it was 21%. So there are differences there, and it may be that the variation, I think generally speaking, in the summer in the southern hemisphere, particularly when we looked at Australia, you've got a little bit more of a consistent definition of summer, whereas we know in the northern hemisphere the definition of summer can be and the reality of the summer can be very different. And I guess you can link that as well to, if you think about fashions and trends, your opportunity to wear different footwear in the summer in the northern hemisphere, for example, is probably very different from the southern hemisphere, where you could probably consistently be in sandals or thongs or whatever it is. But in the northern hemisphere, sort of trend-wise, not many of us have like summer footwear, for example, that we would be able to consistently wear. So that may explain it. I mean, we're surmising, obviously, and we've no evidence to support that. But as an explanation of why those differences appeared, it could be one possible explanation. Right.
Yeah, a colleague I was discussing the paper with the other day was mentioning the many parts of Australia are lying a bit closer to the equator than we are, so possibly enjoying better weather. Okay, so earlier on you did mention this, the idea of using this tool as a way to gauge interest in health promotion campaigns. I suppose if you're looking at the time series analysis, you may see spikes associated with certain health promotion campaigns, may well be much broader than the discussion on the foot and ankle. Is that something that you've been interested in yourself?
It's not something that we've looked at so far, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that you would expect to be able to track with these tools and sort of almost measure the effectiveness of a promotion campaign like that. What you have to be careful of to an extent is that the tool itself, it doesn't give you sort of absolute sort of impression for whether it's speaking, whether it just gives you a sort of relative, and at least a certain number of insertions sort of trigger a threshold where page strips on the tool. So that works in terms of your thresholds, but also for specific things. The defense tool with moving and bringing out updated versions of it sort of periodically. But to go into the sort of regional level, so if it was a regional health promotion campaign, say localised to one city or whatever, you might struggle to see anything there, or don't make any results at all. So it possibly has to be sort of at least a nationwide sort of thing where you can be able to study any effects.
And you can see, I mean, in terms of the background, you can see where it's got real high utility around things like infections and such like. So, where you've got acute health issues, and so maybe outbreaks, as was indicated, influenza was one of those areas, and so you could almost say that there's a kind of proxy surveillance type utility to it if you were able to operate these on a daily basis. So you were following trends, and then you suddenly saw spikes. I guess we're interested in long-term conditions, and so time series trends might be a little bit more of a retrospective reflection on what's happening, perhaps regionally and then globally. And then that might actually help start to perhaps facilitate how you might want to use health resources in terms of planning and execution of those. And so we've had some discussions with fairly senior figures in certainly within NHS Scotland who are intrigued by the data, and would think that there may be some opportunities, some early insights about how they might structure their workforce planning. So if there is, for example, evidence of higher search, does that carry through to greater utilisation of health resources in a winter period, for example? And so matching this data with, so it's a data linkage, I think would be the next exciting thing to do. So for example, with foot pain, could you then start to link that with GP referrals or primary care referrals, and look to see if there was then So in that respect, how does the search then feed knowledge transfer? So how do people act on what they find, and does that then translate into greater access to the data? So we've got a sort of kind of an insight of a pattern, but there's still an element of, well, what does that influence people to do? It would be really interesting then to see if there was seasonal variation in healthcare utilization, which mapped to those trends. And then I think you would have some serious utility there in chronic long-term conditions. But you'd have to be monitoring very regularly to look at sort of acute outbreaks or such like that. Once you start sort of searching for, say, sore throat or fever or temperature, and that produced a spike, which was the precursor to an outbreak in something, then you've really got some opportunities there for early surveillance. So I do think that there could be some really interesting things to do about a global interest group here who might want to sit and think collectively about interesting questions that you could use. And I think that's what we've been very keen to do. We haven't then subsequently gone in and done a whole lot of data mining. We're now sitting and thinking cleverly around some next searches to do based around hypotheses, rather than saying, oh, well, wouldn't it be really interesting to go and have a look at hallux valgus or flat feet or something. So we've been a little bit careful, but so you could see the utility. But I guess it's the sort of globalization of it as well. And as Scott rightly said, you can be surprised in some areas to find that there hasn't been enough searches to produce the statistics that the trends will give you in some surprising areas. So yeah, early days for sure.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, if you're thinking about using this tool, you do have to be very careful in terms of formulating the questions you want to ask, in terms of what you can get out of it, and be very aware of the limitations. We looked at the results for foot pain. How many of those searches for foot pain ultimately reflect people who have subsequently gone to podiatrists for a condition? How many have had a sore foot for a couple of days, and maybe I've looked to see if there's anything to do for it. So whether the results actually do link into our ability to link patterns and medical care pathways, that's still a question that needs to be explored. But it's certainly worth exploring.
Thank you. The list of search terms that you used is does seem fairly comprehensive, and there's additional, like as with many of the articles in the Journal of Foot and Ankle Research. I think one of the can you hear me just now?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that is quite good is that they do often have additional information, and you were good enough to provide more detailed information on the searches and the search terms that you use, which was helpful. Were there, however, any terms that you wished you had included after the completion of the study?
But firstly, I should point out, I'm sure a couple of sharp-eyed people noted it in the paper. There's a small spelling mistake all the way through it. That is that, and I find in this mistake with plasma hashimotosis. But you can be assured that if you look at the supplementary view where the body data, we actually did some using correct spelling here. But in terms of the other search terms, I mean, we're still thinking of this as a concept, just to kind of almost demonstrate the data that's available, that's out there, and generate some interest in the area, get some other people thinking about how this can apply to my field and my speciality. So, I mean, as Jim said, we definitely get ideas of future areas we go into, specific searches were formally from them. But for this paper, we really just the general terms and a few of what we thought would be fairly common science and more specific questions.
But I guess the potential weaknesses is those are terms which we generated as academics and clinicians. What you'd really want is, I guess, is some sort of an organisation or a consensus around what would be the search terms that people out there are using. And that includes obviously colloquialisms and such like, and we're restricted it to English-speaking nations. But we're from Glasgow. There are many terms for pain that people might search for that you wouldn't find in the English dictionary. So you would really want to co-create, I think, a search strategy which cuts across end users, the people who will actually be searching, rather than an academic exercise. So these may not actually reflect words that the people that we're looking for the trend data come from, and maybe other analogous or better terms. So we make no apologies for that. That is a weakness or an inherent limitation of the study. It would have been nice to sit down with a wide group of stakeholders, formulate basically a list of search terms, say around foot pain and analogous terms around that, and then prioritize them and list them, and then maybe do a little bit pre-work around what would be your best 2 or 3 search terms for foot pain. So yeah, I mean, this is to some extent an academic-driven exercise, but we would need to do some validation of those search terms against what people actually do, and go out and survey people and say, is these the terms that you would search by, or do you know other ones, and how close do they relate to that? But foot pain, you kind of think that is a good starting point. I think maybe what I would use as a kind of, if I was searching on Google and I had a sore foot, I might start with it. I think in Glasgow, for example, I think a lot of people would search sore foot rather than foot pain. So again, it's these sorts of to what extent does that term truly reflect what the end users of Google will be searching under.
And also the variations within Scotland, certainly within regions within Scotland, there would likely be some differences, but also I'm not entirely sure what the terms they would tend to search for in Australia or New Zealand or other parts. Which kind of leads me on to one of our other questions here, which I think probably most podiatrists would have an idea of why you had the selection of the populations that you used, this Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere, and the particular regions that you looked at. But do you want to talk us through that? What influenced the selection of these populations?
Either of us, Spanish or French. I mean, it was basically the major countries in the world that we thought that these countries would have a fairly homogeneous selection of terms that we could use for the searches. So the main reason that we included Australia as well was so we could test that seasonality hypothesis to is a worldwide phenomenon. This decrease, or as it turned out, the seasonality was mirrored in Australia, so that was patient listening were along the right line with the seasonality hypothesis.
And I think we would have been struggling otherwise to get a good Southern Hemisphere comparator that was English speaking. And we thought maybe South Africa and things, but really we just felt like, again, in proof of concept, to try and get the extremes, that we felt like, the conditions between Australia and Northern Hemisphere would be a good comparator, and if we couldn't see anything there, then we'd probably be struggling otherwise. And as Scott rightly says, again, we would probably have to bring in language expertise to extend that, and there would have been good opportunities under Spanish-speaking languages as well to look at Northern and Southern Hemisphere comparators, but early steps.
Thank you. There was one other issue I think that you have covered in the discussion of this paper, and that was round about the actual quality of the information that those who are searching the internet would actually uncover. And there was I'm just looking back through this now, you did make a reference to it has been shown that medical information found online, even on reputable websites, is often poorly supported by the evidence. emphasising the need for greater efforts in providing evidence-based sources. And if you just give me 1 second there, looking at foot and ankle conditions specifically in the journal Foot and Ankle Surgery in 2012, there was a paper published, Internet Information Quality for 10 Common Foot and Ankle Diagnoses, where they concluded that the overall quality of internet information for the common foot and ankle conditions was variable, raising concerns about the information available to patients. So, I mean, that wasn't really what you were looking at, but of course it is a natural conclusion. What is the information? Do you have any thoughts on that yourself that you want to share with us?
I mean, as a clinician, it does pose an interesting, you're right, a dilemma. And, do we then go to some sort of benchmarking where we would do that with written information. Again, if you think about my own area around arthritis, I mean, our major medical charities in the UK provide online and written material which is of high quality. It's been evaluated, it's been developed in partnership. So, to some extent there is excellence within that, but there's no benchmarking for it. If you reach the Arthritis Research UK website, I would be confident that that person has reached high quality information. But that website is not benchmarked. It's not benchmarked by anything UK-wide, and it wouldn't be benchmarked by anything globally. So you're right. I mean, we have no idea of the quality of the information that people are accessing via these searches, and so we can make no comment about that per se. But it does raise issues about if the trend is there, and the trend is an upward trend, and it's becoming increasingly a source of information, pre-diagnosis, after diagnosis, as part of the treatment, as part of follow-up, as part of seeking advice for others, then how do we control that? How do we benchmark that? How do we react to that? And we've gone through that situation, isn't it, where I know many GPs who say that it's becoming a real problem. Patients come in armed with, I read this on the internet, and so therefore it must be true. And 5 minutes of the consultation is the GP sort of searching through that, saying, well, this is not this has not come from a quality site, and it's not there's no evidence to underpin this novel treatment for arthritis that's a product of this care. So you're right, it's outside the scope of the paper, and it does bring some really interesting dilemmas here, and I don't think we've responded to it very well, and you can see why people, and I've got a personal example of that. So whilst we were in the final stages of writing this paper, I was on a train and sitting opposite me with two girls, probably I would say in their late teens, who were talking about a friend who had a lump in her neck, and the conversation was basically, yeah, she's got this lump in her neck, and well, what's she done about it? Well, she's Googled it, and she doesn't think it's anything serious, and it was left at that, and that was the end of the conversation. Of course, I wanted to then say, well, what information did she look at? How does she know that's any good? And could she trust it for something, in my mind, which looks quite serious, sounded quite serious, like a lump in the neck? But there was, real evidence of people accessing, being reassured, and in this case, doesn't appear to have been acting on it. So, suspicion of a lump in the neck, they were satisfied from the information that they had from Google, without expert medical opinion, that it was nothing serious. And that's very simplistic. We don't know what is behind all of that, but we have no idea of the quality of the information that was accessed. And if you found the first site that said lumps on the neck aren't really all that serious, you might just go with that because it may, maybe something that helps you think, well, that is actually, I don't want to face that, or it's very serious, and put some reassurance there. So, it's going to be an interesting challenge going forward.
There are actually voluntary systems for many of the websites that produce health information they can sign up to try and verify that the information on their websites is up to date and accurate. But I'm given to understand that the the process of validating that information is almost continuous. It's live. It's always been updated, and so the organisations that certify them, it's impossible for them to keep up with the content that they're supposed to be keeping up with. So it is very much that. It's a voluntary system, and yeah, it does, I think, poses real challenges. And there are more and more places where people are getting information, including also social media as well, I would think. Do you have any other thoughts that you would like to share on this paper just now? Because I don't have any other questions from the list here.
I mean, if there's a user community out there, and we've really enjoyed speaking to you about it, and if you have ideas, you know, we're not here to steal your ideas, but you know, you have our email address, and we'd be very interested to hear, you know, genuinely whether you think this type of analysis would help you understand the condition or patterns of health information access, or if you think of other areas that you think would be a priority to search, then we would be very interested to hear about it. Like I say, it's not our core business, and it was you know, an interesting side project that Scott had started off, because just, you know, it's you know, I guess interesting, and it's a nice use of technology, and it gives us a side issue to look at. But we would be quite interested to hear what students and clinicians in particular might think that this could help them with going forward, and you know, we're certainly very interested to engage in that discussion.
Thank you. Well, it only remains for me to say thank you very much for your time and patience with us this evening with using this new form of technology. So to Dr. Scott Telfer, Professor Jim Woodburn of Glasgow Caledonian University, thank you very much. And that's good evening from us. Thank you.
Thank you.